Well, it seems the president is trying to grab more power this morning and upend the legal system at the border. No due process, no courts. He wants to throw out undocumented immigrants who cross the border with no judges or legal proceedings. Now, we're waiting to hear from constitutionalists on this. What do they think of this? Silence so far. The president reportedly angry he can't do more by executive fiat, and also angry that he reversed the administration's decision to separate children from their parents at the border. The Trump administration claims it has a plan for reuniting the thousands of families it chose to separate, but it really is not clear how, even less clear when. Some 500 children, the government says, have been reunited with their parents, but more than 2,000 children remain in custody scattered around the entire country.
All of this as lawmakers visiting detention centers to see the conditions firsthand are describing some of them as prison-like, noting they saw children sleeping in cells on concrete floors. All of this, of course, the backdrop for what we're waiting on in Washington. The House expected to vote this week on a compromise immigration bill. Republican leaders say the White House supports it, despite the president telling lawmakers last week not to waste their time on it. So can it actually pass the House? We've got all of this covered for you this morning. We go first to CNN's Abby Phillip, who is live at the White House. Abby?
Well, good morning, Erica. President Trump had a busy Sunday on social media, tweeting that the U.S. should deport illegal immigrants without any due process at all. He also noted that the U.S. was facing an invasion of, quote, these people coming in across the borders. And he also railed against existing immigration laws. All of this while his administration continues to struggle to explain how they are going to reunite these families that had been separated for weeks at the border.
Unite the families now!
Protests intensifying as the Trump administration struggles to reunite the thousands of children still separated from their parents. Democratic lawmakers touring detention centers at the border, blasting the conditions they saw inside.
It's a disturbing picture. There are children by themselves. I saw a 6-month-old baby. They're all on concrete floors in cages. There's just no other way to describe it.
But despite the public outcry, President Trump ramping up his hardline immigration rhetoric, suggesting that those who crossed into the United States illegally should be sent back immediately without due process or an appearance before a judge. The New York Times reports that President Trump complained to aides about why he could not just create an overarching executive order to solve the problem. Those aides explained to him that immigration overhaul is beyond his powers.
The problem with his executive order is it's in direct contradiction to the standing order and ruling from the judge in 2015. My guess, that stroke of a pen does not survive 3 weeks before this court overrules it.
The president blaming Democrats for failing to pass immigration reform legislation last week and calling his party to focus on immigration in the fall, not now.
And I like the issue for election, too. Our issue is strong borders, no crime. Their issue is open borders. Let MS-13 all over our country.
President Trump's comments leaving Republicans confused on how to move forward.
I did talk to the White House yesterday. They say the president's still 100% behind us.
I don't know how in the world we're going to fix this in the short term. It's really a big mess.
This as the Department of Homeland Security and Health and Human Services reveal their plan to reunite immigrant families separated at the border. Children will remain in custody of Health and Human Services based on the results of their parents' immigration proceedings. If the parent is released, they can apply to be the child's sponsor, a process that could take weeks. If the parent is deported, the child will be reunited before they leave the country. But it's still unclear who will link the parents with their children. Backlash over the crisis hitting home as Press Secretary Sarah Sanders was kicked out of a Virginia restaurant Friday night. Sanders firing back on Twitter. Her actions say far more about her than about me. I always do my best to treat people, including those I disagree with, respectfully and will continue to do so. The owner of the Red Hen saying, I explained that the restaurant has certain standards that I feel it has to uphold, such as honesty and compassion and cooperation. I said I'd like to ask you to leave.
And here at the White House, it's foreign policy on the agenda this morning. The president will host King Abdullah of Jordan and also Queen Rania Al Abdullah here at the White House. Later this afternoon, he's heading to West Columbia, South Carolina for a political trip on behalf of Governor Henry McMaster. This is the eve of a special election down in that state.
All right, Abby Phillip for us at the White House. Abby, thanks so much. And remember, when we're talking about restaurants and people getting kicked out or staying in, there are still 2,000 children who are separated from their parents by the U.S. government, scattered all around the country. And we've had remarkably little visibility at how they're doing or what conditions they're living in. Some lawmakers have been allowed into just a few of these places. You just heard from Elizabeth Warren describe the conditions that she saw. Let's go to CNN's Polo Sandoval live outside a facility in Los Fresnos, Texas. Polo, what are you learning?
Well, John, many of those reunifications are happening according to the U.S. government, many of them happening at this remote Cameron County, Texas facility in Port Isabel. About 538 children have been reunited with their parents, according to the latest update provided by the Department of Homeland Security and also Health and Human Service. Let's dive into some of the other numbers, though, because clearly there is more to be done. About 2,037 children are still in the care of HHS at this hour. An important distinction to point out here this morning, only 17% of those have been recently separated from their parents because of the enforcement of zero tolerance policy. The rest of the 83%, those are undocumented minors that have come across the border by themselves. So it's very important to keep that in mind, because that is part of an issue that we have been covering really for years, particularly since 2014, when we watched as at least 70,000 unaccompanied children poured across the U.S.-Mexico border. So what we are also seeing, though, is obviously that call for answers. Many of these lawmakers that have been traveling to these facilities are not only calling on the reunification of those children who were separated from their parents, but also for a closer look at the way some of these children are managed, some of these kids are managed. Just this past weekend, a 15-year-old undocumented Honduran boy essentially walked off the premises from a facility that he was being housed at. Southwest Key Services, the owner and the operator, saying that policies were followed. They are not a detention center. They're simply a child care facility. Erica and John.
All right, Polo Sandoval for us in Los Fresnos, Texas. Polo, thanks so much. I want to bring in A.B. Stoddard, an associate editor at Real Clear Politics, and Brian Karam, CNN political analyst and the executive editor of the Sentinel newspapers. Brian, we're hearing that the president is full of regret that he signed this executive order trying to reverse the White House choice to separate children from their parents. And we're hearing directly from him that he wants more power and less due process at the border. What do you make of it?
It's one hot mess, isn't it? It's a microcosm of the entire Trump administration. And I think Maggie Haberman had it right last hour when she said, for the first time, it's going to be a defining moment for this president. It's exposing the weaknesses of this presidency at its very base level. Chaos because the president decided, with the help of his favorite friend, Stephen Miller, to come up with this particular bit of strategy to go after people coming across the border. It didn't work. The optics were bad. They didn't tell us the truth about it. It was chaos. First, he said it was, the Democrats' fault. Then he came back and said it's still the Democrats' fault. Then he said something else. It was a policy that wasn't a policy. They had an executive order to change the policy. And now you have some 2,000 children that are not reunited with their parents. And some of the sources I have in Homeland Security say quite bluntly and quite honestly, they're afraid some of these children may never be reacquainted with their parents. That's a sobering thought. And at the same time, then you have the president who regrets what he did and now wishes he had more power. It shows the ignorance of how our system works. The fact that at the very beginning, when the Trump administration began, they couldn't get the best and the brightest. The people that they got have brought to this country chaos and ignorance. And that type of ignorance and arrogance and chaos is only continuing to, it's like a snowball going down the hill, and golly, you don't want to be at the bottom of the hill.
There's that one part of it. There's the ignorance of how things work. Just basic understanding of how government works. Yes,
absolutely.
There is a minor thing, maybe a whole separation of powers thing we have going on. There's also this ignorance of the details of the story, right, and how difficult immigration is. But AB, it also brings up the fact that this is a president who does time and again go to what he sees as a quick fix because he just wants to wave a pen and make it move forward. That's a big part of this as well.
Right. It'll be interesting to see what the reaction is to his sort of call against any due process for these migrants. We've known from incident after incident that the president is frustrated by his lack of ability to command more expansive power in his job as president. He finds the other co-equal and separate branches of the legislature and the judiciary sort of pesky and in his way. And that's not a surprise. There are two political tensions here. One is that there is a strong majority in this country that does not want these families to be separated. The second one is, though, that they don't want illegal immigration in these high numbers. And so if you look at a CBS poll out last night, 48% of the respondents wanted the families kept together and returned to their home country together. 21% wanted them to stay. So they are not actually for indefinite detention as a family unit. They want them to be together from the start and then, in most cases, sent home. So that's the political tension here. What's going to overlay that is what Brian was talking about, you're talking about, this incredible incompetence and chaos. The fact that there's no interagency umbrella coordinating the location of the parents with the children, and that we're looking at months ahead of the possibility of most of the 2,000 remaining children who were separated from their parents not being able to be reunited with them. Those are the images, that's the conversation that's going to overlay the political debate going into the fall election.
And look, the U.S. government did this. The U.S. government separated 2,000, 2,500 kids from their families, John. And look, the president is not going to eliminate due process. I don't think he's ever going to get what he wants there. But we do have a window into where his head is on this. And yes, he says he wants to stop illegal immigration over the border, John. But I also get the sense, you know, he wants to cut down on the legal process also. He's talking about asylum seekers here. He'd love to see that restricted, you know, incredibly.
Yeah, no, look, I mean, the president views the Constitution and Congress as impediments to what he would like to get done. And there are advisors in the White House who seem to have a real issue, not just with illegal immigration, as you say, but with non-white immigration. And these are demographic issues and political strategies coming to a head. AB talked about incompetence and chaos. Well, there's also cruelty, and that's why this issue is not playing the way the president would like, and he can't make it disappear. This is a fundamental conflict between our values and policies. And when people see children crying and screaming, separated from their parents and put in cages, without any receipts, any ability to connect them, that violates them. And the choice is not between open borders and reuniting these families. That's a false choice. So the president and his administration is going to have to get their head around dealing with this, because the old strategy, the traditional strategy of distract, deflect, and divide is not going to trump, pun unintended, crying separated children away from their families.
There is no way that this president can get his head around this particular situation, John. He has determined and shown us that it's impossible for him to do it.
Well, except I think what John is saying, and I think there is some evidence to this, is he wants fewer people coming from Mexico or South, legally or otherwise. Legally or otherwise.
You're absolutely right. If these were white people instead of brown people, we would not be having this conversation. The simple fact of the matter is, it's who's coming across the border. You don't see this type of heated rhetoric or debate about people who have come across the border and have extended their welcome past their visas and are now illegal immigrants from other countries where they are white. That's a problem this administration has, the entire optics of the situation, and again, speaks to the ignorance of the and the complexities of this situation. And at the bottom line, you know, John nailed it. It's this president wants to be King Donald Trump, not President Donald Trump, and really doesn't care too much about how the constitutional separation of powers takes place. He wants to be able to have an edict and go forward, and it doesn't work that way.
No, it does not. We'll continue to see how that all falls out, not just today, of course, throughout the week. We do want to get your take, though, on what happened, of course, over the weekend to Sarah Huckabee Sanders. She was asked to leave a restaurant. She had already been seated, served the cheese board, as we understand it. The restaurant owner standing by her decision to ask her to leave. They both say the exchange was very polite. The reaction from people across the board on both sides has not been as polite or as measured. Here's some of what Maxine Waters had to say over the weekend. I want to play this first.
And if you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a a gasoline station. You get out and you create a crowd. And you push back on them. And you tell them they're not welcome anymore, anywhere.
There is a lot in that moment, to say the very least. AB, you start this one us off with this one. That is some loaded rhetoric from a public official.
Maxine Waters is poised to take over one of the most important positions in the separate and co-equal branch of government as chairman of the Financial Services Committee in the House. She is doing everything she can to prevent her own promotion. This is beyond overreach. It is so outrageous that she is trying to motivate voters on her side to be as divisive as President Trump. It is. I just find it really unbelievable that this is the kind of thing that they're trying to stoke, this sort of mob mentality on the left. It's just the exact thing that will drive turnout on the other side. And this is exactly the example that Maggie was talking about, and we've talked about here so many times. People sort of end up, behaving like the president, and they shoot themselves in the foot.
Yeah, this is so.
Hang on, Brian.
Brian, just one second. Because Amy's raising the election, and that's in the backdrop of everything. 140 days out, and midterm elections tend to be high intensity, low turnout. And if Republicans are feeling a bit divided about the president, maybe a bit demoralized about the lack of the Republican Party in Congress standing up to the president, this is exactly the kind of thing that's going to get them motivated, because it will create a veneer of moral equivalence. And if we get to a place as a country where it's open season on anyone if they serve in an administration in public, when mob rule starts being advocated by elected officials, that is bad for everybody. And it's the opposite, as you pointed out, of Michelle Obama's "they go low, we go high."
So Republicans running on the farm to table ticket. Brian, I want to get your take on this, specifically on Sarah Sanders in the restaurant, because I watch a little TV, and every once in a while I see that you and Sarah, don't see eye to eye on things in the briefing room. So do you think it was appropriate for this restaurant to ask Sarah to leave?
Look, I don't own that restaurant, and I would only say that I disagree with what you say, but will defend to death your right to say it. So in so much as I believe that, I also believe that in D.C. there's nothing worse than a Republican other than a Democrat. As Maxine Waters proved, that was way over the top. I would have served her. I mean, I have my disagreements with Sarah, but I go back afterwards and we're still able to talk. I don't understand. What happened is just a little bit of civility. I mean, what we have in the press briefing room is a question and an answer. And I'll press hard, and I hope that, I have pressed hard, and she answers or doesn't answer. That's it. But you're out with your family going to a restaurant. What did she do that would warrant her being, thrown out of? Now, I got a lot of grief for saying that over this weekend too. Resist. And look, man, I'm not that guy. You come in a restaurant, I'll serve you. I mean, unless you're doing something really outrageous. But I used to work as a waiter, so I'd served a lot of strange people.
Brian Cameron, not that guy. He's a lot of other guys.
No.
A lot of other
Not
guys.
that guy.
I'm the other guy.
Not that guy. All right, Brian Cameron, right there. AV, thanks so much for being with us as well. As we